Hello. Welcome to my channel Touching Stories. You're about to hear an amazing story about love and unexpected decisions. Enjoy watching.
The backseat of the car, speeding along the country highway toward the village, was a mess. But Sam's eyes were fixed on the road after all. It had been almost 24 hours without sleep, and he just had to be careful. Marge, yuck. You. Who's talking? Bad head. Tony, with all his Bogator's almost strength by the time he was 19, had grown into a 2-meter tall man, was pulling a bag of dried meat, not intending to give it to the dog. Not because it was a pity. Tony was not the kind of man to not treat his hungry little brother. But it was just that the meat was bought not in a pet store, but in a supermarket for people, and accordingly was generously salted and even peppered with pepper and other spices. In general, the dog was not allowed to eat it. "Why didn't you put a muzzle on him?" shrieked the girl sitting next to him, trying to dodge this fuss in the cramped space of the car interior. "He spit all over my pants." "You shouldn't have come with us if you don't like dogs," Tony shouted. "Oh, you little sissy, who'd ever marry you like that?" "Ouch. Mars, you're a biter too? Give it back. You. Finally, the bag of meat was taken away and tucked deep into Tony's sweatshirt pocket. "Are you offended?" He turned to the pouting Marie, who was staring at her phone. But judging by the way she snorted, holding back hysterical laughter, she wasn't offended at all. "Okay, people," Sam said. "Let's go over the points again, okay? We're going on vacation. We're going to clean up the mess." Yeah, I remember." Maria rolled her eyes. "In the fall, you will put the house on the market. The realtor has already found, and he says that in this form, the house will scare away all the buyers and reduce the value of the object. So instead of a normal recovery in the fresh air, we will be 2 whole months of jumping with paint and rakes. Did I miss anything? Come on." Tony nudged her in the side and winked at the driver through the rearview mirror and added, "We'll have a great time. I personally have never been to the village in my life. I know it from my grandmother's stories, and I'll tell you, my friends, we're in for a great adventure." Sam yawned widely and smiled, shook his head. His companions were as usual in their repertoire, and maybe it was the law of attraction of opposites that made them all feel so good together. They were nothing alike, and then probably by the will of fate itself, one day they met and came together, intertwined, like the threads of 3 balls, blossomed in one basket. The village house they were traveling to had once belonged to Sam's great-great-grandfather, then passed to his great-great-grandparents, and from them to his parents who, breaking the tradition of farming as the sphere of activity of the Walker family, became city dwellers. But then, one day decided to return to the roots, though not in the full sense of the expression. In general, Sam had never seriously considered whether he loved his parents. Of course he did, as any normal child should love his mom and dad, if they are not, of course, not quite so egregious monsters and scoundrels. And that's what Sam couldn't call his parents, despite all their faults. The main one was that at a certain age they had decided to do away with bringing him up, living with him and sending him away. It was all about Sam being an unplanned child. He found out about it at 17, about a month after his high school graduation, when his parents called him in for his first really serious conversation and to voice their decision about his future. Young Sam listened to this and his cheeks blushed with a variety of feelings of shame, anger, humiliation, and a sense of unreality, surrealism. "I didn't want to give birth," my mother said. "I thought there was a female malfunction in my body and I missed my due date. When it was possible to abort," added the father. "Then, of course, we decided that we would raise you. If the higher powers had decided," the mother smiled, and Sam could almost physically feel that she was lying at that phrase. "No," he thought later, "you may have fallen in love with me." His parental instincts kicked in, I guess, but first decided not to give him to the orphanage, because it would not completely get rid of the problems, but only would modify them, because it would have to pay alimony and would be ashamed in front of people, relatives, colleagues, friends. But the young man did not say anything of what he thought. He just listened. In general, in his 17 years, Sam was very quiet, modest, and sullen in the opinion of peers and teachers. Yes, he studied diligently, attended sports clubs, even participated in amateur concerts, and also went to camp in the summer. But the boy lacked liveliness or something. He lacked that direct ease, which is inherent in all children and adorns the childhood period of life until the time when the guys are quite grown up. Believe me, you have never been a burden to us. The mother continued her speech with feeling and took the father's hand, squeezed it for support, and he nodded. Believe me, we couldn't have dreamed of a better son. We love you, even though we didn't plan it. We love you very much. But now, you're a big boy, son. And we're not getting any younger. We want to live for ourselves. We're thinking of moving out of town, my father said. The village house is our family home. We'll rent out the apartment and live there. Fresh air, farm products, such things. And you, by the way, will have a place to come for summer vacation. Vacation? Sam asked in a colorless voice. Naturally, nodded his father. You're a student after all. And by the way, I think it makes sense for you to apply to the neighboring city where the teaching base is more powerful. Unless, of course, you're serious about building a career instead of living from paycheck to paycheck. So, neighboring town, can I get a specific name? And who am I staying with? In this, Sam believed his parents that they sent him to another locality not to stay out of the way here, but sincerely caring about him. Because in foresight and the ability to make solid decisions, seriously affecting the study and work, they were able to always. And no, the fact that he was not a welcome child, the appearance of which is the main miracle for parents, which is adored even before his birth, this, in principle, did not become for him such a great discovery. Because, yes, there had always been some estrangement between him and his parents, but it was strange, frightening, and surprising to Sam. But for some reason, this conversation hadn't really hurt him. He rather summarized the line, clarified what had been generally clear before. But much later, looking back on his childhood, Sam realized that no, he would not have wished for other parents. Yes, maybe it wasn't perfect with these ones, but they still took care of him, didn't hurt him, didn't reproach him in any way. And also, as he believed deep down, they probably loved him over time. It was just, for some reason, it was not customary in their family to talk about such feelings openly, and then it became too late. As soon as Sam turned 18, that is, this same year in July, he left for a neighboring town. Aunt Martha, his father's cousin, took him in. It was a kind, cheerful woman. People around about such people usually say that they have a battery inside, that they are always glowing with positivity. Aunt Martha often came to visit, so Sam knew her well, and it didn't take long to get used to each other. Martha owned a swanky 3-bedroom in a Stalin-era house, and she also owned the small but successful art gallery, inherited from her first and only, now deceased husband Archie. At the time of their marriage, by the way, they had a serious age difference of 32 years. But as Martha herself said, they lived soul to soul, and she never married again. Choosing what to become in this life by profession, Sam never doubted that he would be a translator. It just so happened that since childhood he was given foreign languages easily. He cracked knowledge easily, like peanuts. Studying at the university, of course, was not as easy as the school time, but not badly given. In his hometown, Sam, of course, remained all sorts of friends, acquaintances, but with them as quickly lost ties. The thing was, he'd always been a little aloof from the other guys, which was largely due to the fact that at school he was a typical nerd, and even a little bit of a snooty. Nobody let anyone cheat, told everyone that dabble is stupid, and study hard. Then, years to 14, Sam changed the direction of behavior, but, as they say, the moment at school was missed. Neighbors continued to consider him a weirdo and a nerd, but at the new place, he managed to start all over again. No, Sam still believed that school came first, but he also began to realize that life does not consist of it alone, and he made friends, the best of whom were now traveling with him to the village. Maria was the daughter of Marta's co-worker. About such people say good girl, almost to 50 years of their age, and they carried this characteristic with a proudly raised head, considering it an amulet for all occasions of life and in general a pass to a prosperous fate. Maria dressed modestly, listened to classical music and maximum Soviet pop songs, snorted derisively if she was called to watch a Hollywood blockbuster, despised fast food, but did not visit fitness halls, believed in one love for life and bonus. When they were going to the village, firmly stated that no, she will not bake potatoes with guys in the fire, because so it forms carcinogenic substances. And yet Maria went with Sam, and she volunteered, because she was a loyal friend and wanted moral support. And Tony wasn't easy. They met when this kid, 2 years younger than Sam, he was 17 and Tony was 19, tried to steal his wallet at the bus stop. He was caught and he gave it back, asked to be let go. Yeah, sure, Sam said menacingly then, holding the guy in a grip he'd taken a self-defense class in. So you can hurt anybody else? You're a criminal. No, I'm a good man, Tony grumbled stubbornly and resentfully. People around them were already staring at them, of course, and then suddenly Sam's mind came together. That it was November outside, and the thief was wearing a skinny jacket. That he had circles under his eyes and his stomach rumbled. He let the guy go and said, "Let's go. We need to talk." The thief rounded his eyes, but sensing that there would be no retribution right now, he followed. The people at the bus stop gave the young men perplexed looks. Sam led the hapless thief to a diner and ordered hamburgers, fries, more coffee, cinnamon rolls, cheese puffs. "What are you doing?" the thief asked incredulously, but he didn't drool on the tray of food. "What's your name?" "Tony." "Sam, let's get acquainted." He held out his hand and the new acquaintance smiled shyly. "Let's have a snack and then we'll talk, okay?" "Okay." Tony nodded and unwrapped the hamburger, sinking his teeth into it greedily and moaning with pleasure. "With double cheese. I love cheese." It turned out that Tony's parents were lost people. They didn't work, but they found money for alcohol. Tony wanted to work, tried it, but it turned out bad. He got a job at the market selling shoes. His father came by to ask him for money. Tony refused, saying he was sick of his parents' alcoholism and he wouldn't provide for them. Then his father, leaving, took a couple of boxes of shoes, and Tony got it. He was accused of stealing. Naturally, they didn't pay him a dime. The owner of the shoe department made Tony work for free for 4 days and said that he had a lot of acquaintances and he would arrange it so that the guy will never be hired anywhere in the city again. "What's your plan?" Sam asked. "Well, I saw an ad. They invite you to earn money in the region," Tony answered. "They say you can earn $5,000 a day or even 10. As soon as I turn 18, I'll go straight away." "No," Sam said seriously. "It's bait. At best they won't pay you anything, but they can sell you into slavery." "Slavery?" Tony laughed. "We're not in the Middle Ages." But then when Sam explained to him how it was, he stopped laughing and got sad. Tony looked away. "What am I supposed to do? I've got 9 grades of school. Where am I going to go with this?" "You could go to vocational school," Sam said. "I see you're confused, kid." "Are you gonna save me?" Tony grinned bitterly. "No, thanks for feeding me, of course, and for letting me go, but it won't work with me. I'm a lost soul." "How can you be so sure?" "How else could you be sure?" Tony shrugged. "My father, uncles, mother, and all my relatives are boozers. My heredity is spoiled." "A man is the master of his own destiny," Sam said confidently. "Shall we be friends, Tony?" For a while, Tony looked suspiciously at the outstretched hand, as if he might be bitten. Then he took a deep breath, sniffed his nose, and a firm, masculine handshake took place between two guys so different. That was 4 years ago, and Tony's life had been completely turned around since then. First of all, Sam had gotten the support of Aunt Martha, who, though not a very compassionate person, had decided to let Tony stay with her. He was shocked by such generosity and acted like a scared street kitten at first. Except he wasn't hiding behind the couch. It didn't take a psychic to realize Tony had seen little good from others before. But despite the environment of his childhood and adolescence, he somehow miraculously managed to keep, as they say, pure heart, did not embitter, did not acquire bad habits. He wanted to be a normal person, to get to the best. Just until now, it seemed to him that he was running in a vicious circle, like a donkey from ancient Rome, who walked, tied to the threshing machine of grain, in a circle all day long. Tony was helped financially, bought him decent clothes, and even the first smartphone in his life. It was obvious that he was not just fulfilling his duties, but even gladly helped around the house to wash the floor, run to the store, wash and iron all the things. Martha helped with employment. She had a mountain of acquaintances. and Tony went to vocational school and decided to become a car mechanic. In all these years, Sam had only twice come to his parents' house in the village for a week in the summer and visited them on New Year's Eve and birthdays. But he was quick to leave. He just felt that it is not necessary to delay with the guesting because parents themselves live a wonderful life. And then disaster struck. They died in a car accident, and only then Sam really realized how much he loved them and how hard it was for him that he was not the child they could love with all their hearts. But life went on. And so it was decided to have a vacation in the village. The summer was unusually hot and sunny, and then sell the house. Sam also planned to sell his parents' apartment, but later he was going to buy real estate for himself in the city where he lived with Aunt Martha, where his life was going on, especially since he had recently received a university diploma and therefore it was time to go to work. He was already expected to work as a translator from and into English in a large trading company. As for the dog Mars, he was not supposed to appear in the small company at all, but he appeared and joined just a couple of weeks ago. It was in every way a remarkable doggy. His breed affiliation was defined by Tony as Groovy Beastie, by Mary as Ugly Flea, Get Away From Me, and by Sam as Cocker Spaniel. He used to live across the street and was walked by an old lady named Adelaide. Then the old lady passed away and her relatives barely returned from the funeral, threw Mars on the stairwell. He did not understand why he was like that and longing for his missing mistress, howled in the entrance, which annoyed the neighbors, so they put him out on the street. And there he was found by Aunt Martha. In general, she did not keep pets, saying that her heart belonged only to the cat Kefir, who lived with her husband. But Auntie couldn't get past Mars, and clawing at Adelaide's hairs, who must have been cursed by the dead woman from the other world for their callousness. Martha brought the spaniel home. The duties of taking him to the vet for preventive care and buying him stuff at the pet store were left to Tony, who, yes, continued to live in their apartment. They reasoned so to his home, to his parents' Akashim guy cannot return to his parents. To rent a corner is an unnecessary expense, and at the start of young life, better let him live where he lived before. But now Tony, by the way, could make his share of the utility bills. And in general, as he began to earn, he was a generous guy. From the receipt always brought a cake for all, then to the cake and flowers for Martha. Let the animal enjoy the fresh air, Martha said, and so Mars went to the village. How beautiful, exclaimed Tony when Mars drove up the hill overlooking the village. The expanse was indeed picturesque, the silvery ribbon of the river winding through it, the ghostly mist floating over the flooded meadow, the clock showing barely 5 in the morning, and the mooing of a herd of cows wandering away from the village. The houses from here seemed quite tiny, some fairy tale gingerbread. It was a village not crowded, but it could be said without a shadow of exaggeration that the prosperous locals had a job in a large agricultural holding, and tourists often came here for ecotourism. Finally, Mariana reached the village itself and stopped at the gate of the right house. Sam got out to open it. Cool, said Tony when the whole company was in the yard. If you're a fan of abandoned places, Maria shook her head and wrinkled her nose. Sorry, Sam, I don't mean anything. I know, the guy waved his hand. My parents wanted to live in the countryside, but had no idea how to do it right. The yard was indeed a sad sight to anyone with any understanding of village life. The shriveled outbuildings, the fence overgrown with ivy. Instead of a vegetable garden, wild grass had grown up to the waist. The barrel that once held water was crumbling from time. And it wasn't that it had been 6 months since his parents had died, and there was no one to look after everything here. Not when Sam visited. In fact, the only thing his parents kept more or less in order was the house, just enough to keep it from falling apart. I don't get it, Maria said. Why didn't they live in the city? The mother's asthma worsened with age, Sam replied. Dad took a remote job. They said he was drawn to his roots. But I agree with you. They lived in the village, but they didn't become their own here. I'd like a house and a farmyard. Tony spoke up. I'd have chickens, pigs. I'd buy a cow. And planted a lot of zucchini, big and black. The black ones are eggplants, Maria corrected him mockingly. Let them be eggplants, Tony smiled. The main thing is that it grows and bears fruit. Then you should be an agronomist. You're the one with the Mary Nami fiddling, sighed Maria. I want to earn a lot of money. Here, I already know how to do it. How is it? Tuning Marions to make. I'll collect cars for rich people and I'll rise on it. And then, maybe I'll really become a farmer. Maybe here, or maybe I'll go to Sicily and cultivate olives there. You're the last thing we need in Italy. Maria looked down at her phone again and walked back into the house. Sam and Tony started carrying things. Mars, clearly going crazy from the oxygen-rich air and the atmosphere of freedom of the countryside, ran around in circles. Ow, help, help. Suddenly it was heard from the house and the boys, having thrown everything, rushed into the house. What happened? They exclaimed in unison. Mashenka stood on a stool. Her eyes were round and there was horror in them. Her lips were trembling. Her face was whiter than canvas. There, she whispered and jabbed her finger somewhere on the floor. A mouse. There's no mouse. Tony squatted down, looking at the crevices in the floorboards. It got away. It's in the basement, isn't it? Parents didn't seem to use it. Sam shrugged. What would they keep in there? There was a refrigerator for groceries, drawers under the table for vegetables. I'm not staying in a house with a mouse, Maria exclaimed hysterically. She needs you too much, Tony grinned. She's probably more scared of you than you are of her. So let's get our things and have a rest, a snack, Ed? Personally, I'm tired as a wolf. Hungry like a wolf. That's the right way to say it. Sam corrected his friend, and the boys went back to work. They had a snack of cookies and cakes that Aunt Martha had given them for the road. They boiled the kettle and sat at the table, just in case Maria put an overturned empty box next to it and put her feet on it. She was afraid of the return of the fearsome mouse. The dog was also not left without food for him, took a few cans of canned food and a bag of dry food. After the meal, they began to decide where and who would sleep. Maria, as a lady, Sam gave up her parents' bedroom. Sam, together with Tony, decided that they would sleep in the second room, which also served as a living room, kitchen. Wow, this is creepy, Tony said. The guy stood against the wall and looked at the picture. In general, parents did not bother with the furnishings of the house, being satisfied with little, but here are pictures of reproductions of famous canvases. Here hung a lot. And all of them in one way or another reflected what Sam's parents lived, their passion, which was, as he suspected, even deeper and stronger than the love that had forced them to marry. They'd met because they had common interests. His father was then a teacher at the university and was known as a ruthless, but also immensely talented history teacher. Mother was an art historian who had just received her diploma and was eager to work with something beautiful. By the way, Aunt Martha had told Sam more than once that if she hadn't been friends with his mother on the grounds of similarity of occupation, because Martha was an art dealer, Sam's parents probably wouldn't have sent him to her. And so, they believed that she was not only a relative, but also an intelligent person, and therefore could be trusted. Sam, by the way, was not very much in agreement with this. He believed that any person, regardless of what he does in life, can be good or bad. Yeah, I agree. So much for that, Sam said, looking at the painting. It seemed to be a Scottish painter of the mid-18th century. The painting depicted an underwater world, like a lake. Among the flocks of fish and seaweed at its bottom was a kelpie, a mythical horse, essentially a demon. Legends said that kelpies sometimes come ashore and wait there for daredevils, who, deciding that the ownerless horse could become theirs, try to put a bridle on him or even sit on his back. Legends said that then the kelpie would rush to the lake, and even the most skillful and brave rider could not stop him. The demonic horse would dive into the water and carry the man to the very bottom, where he, of course, died. But that wasn't the end of it. Legends said that such a poor drowned man becomes an eternal servant of the water elves. This is exactly the kind of hapless horse lover depicted in the picture. He was pulling his hands up in horror, but he was already pale and even greenish in color. Tony, in general, knew what Sam's parents were doing, but now his friend felt it necessary to explain something else to him. His father decided it was better for his mom not to work at all, not to waste her health. She sort of became a housewife. Not really. Anyway, my father left teaching just to move to the countryside. He started writing books on history, articles in magazines. He worked remotely as a tutor. Can you imagine, when I said that I wanted to study foreign languages, My father decided that I would join the family and help him in his research. And when he found out that I just want to work anywhere, but outside all this cultural history, we even quarreled. I see Tony stretched out, looking at the next picture of an inquisitor burning a witch at the stake. What kind of research did your father do? Was he looking for pirate treasure? No, Sam smiled. He said treasure was a myth, and real historians should dig deeper. Where? I have no idea, Sam shrugged. We haven't talked much lately. My parents were doing something. They were studying local history, about how people settled the area, how the first settlements came to be here. I didn't get into it. Hey guys, Maria distracted them. There it is. Neighbors came. What do you want? Tony stretched his neck, looking out the window into the yard. Let the owner deal with it. Maria nodded at Sam. A whole miniature delegation of neighbors came. First of all, it was Billy's grandfather, the old-timer, who in other times would have been appointed headman. What? He rounded his eyes when he heard the price Sam planned to sell the house and lot for. Nobody's gonna buy it for that kind of money. I know your parents, so I'll give you some advice. Grandpa wagged his finger. You wouldn't argue. You give in as a neighbor, as a human being. Mind if you would buy the house? Well, for half the price. Sam politely said that's impossible because the realtor did a preliminary appraisal. Your realtor is a fool. Grandpa Billy spat and left, scolding the unconscious, money-hungry youth. Besides, Grandma Selena came in, 70 years old, but she was sturdy and offered to buy milk, cottage cheese, and other things from her, as well as eggs, chickens, sauerkraut. I'll give you a discount, Selena winked. It's scary to look at them. Look how skinny they are. I'm not skinny, resented Maria, who generally used to everywhere and everywhere to tell the truth and what she thought. For which, by the way, has repeatedly run into assorted problems. I'm just watching my figure. I'll come back for milk from the evening milking, Sam agreed. Thank you very much. Another man, Harvey, who worked at the agricultural holding as a tractor driver and offered the same services to neighbors, came to talk. No, thank you. It's too late to plow the land, and next year there will be other owners, Sam said. But I'll recommend you to them as the best specialist. Harvey stepped closer and handed Sam $5,000. What's this? He didn't understand. Your parents came to me. A down payment, as it were. For plowing a vegetable garden? No? Harvey hesitated, glancing at Maria and Tony, as if unsure if it was okay to talk in front of them. But then he went on. He said that Sam's parents wanted Harvey and Maria to go with them to the woods in the fall. Why? Sam didn't understand anything at all. I don't know, Harvey said. They said they had to clear something out. Maybe they wanted to build something. In the woods? Well, how should I know? It's just that if you don't need it anymore, I'm returning it. All right, I'm out of here. Call me if you need anything. With the money in his pocket, Sam called his friends back to the house to get settled in. Plus, he had to check the wiring because the light bulb was blinking suspiciously, and he had to run to the store to fill the refrigerator. In general, there was a lot to do. How can you eat that? Maria puckered her lips as Tony and Sam, almost rumbling with pleasure, sampled the milk from the evening's milking. Not pasteurized. Do you know what you can get from that? I do, Tony replied, wiping his milk mustache with the palm of his hand. Strong immunity. You sure you won't have any? Mars likes it. He nodded at the dog, who was licking from the bowl. Finally, they all went to bed. Sam knew, in principle, that old houses like this one could make all sorts of sounds, creaks, tapping. After all, everything here was made of wood, which dried out and deteriorated over time. And then, of course, there could be mice rustling around, or even rats. But still, in the silence of the night, he was disturbed to sleep by some strange sounds. Tony was lying on the couch against the wall, and Sam was on the cot. He turned on his side and thought about plugging his ears so he could fall asleep. But then he realized that the sounds, first of all, they were coming from downstairs, and secondly, they were suspicious. If he had been a person with a more fragile nervous system and a more vivid imagination, he would have thought it was a ghost moaning quietly. Tony, are you asleep? He called softly. I'm asleep, replied his friend. Are you asleep? No. You should be. I'm tired. Tomorrow we have to go swimming at the river. We'll drown if we don't sleep. Tony, what do you want? My friend replied, visibly irritated. Listen, well, be a man. I'm tired. Listen to me. I am listening. To you, said the boy grimly. No. Do you hear that noise downstairs? For a few minutes, the guys were quiet, both trying to make sense of the strange sound. Didn't you say your parents didn't use the cellar and it's empty? I guess so. Then what's making the noise? I don't know. Shall we check it out? The boys sat down on their beds and stared at each other with round eyes. It was night, but the milky white light of the moon and the silver light of the stars poured into the room, giving the ordinary village atmosphere a certain disturbing mystical tinge. Maria didn't need to be woken up. Tony was already pulling on his jeans. She's a girl. And besides, if there's something really wrong, she won't be much use. What do you mean there's something wrong? Sam asked. A zombie, his friend said with a serious face, and then he jumped. Oh, come on. You watch too many horror movies, and then you say whatever you want. Horror stories are good for the body. Says who? British scientists. They show us how to act in dangerous situations, prepare our nervous system for the trials. Does it work for you? Do you often run away from zombies or fight vampires? Tony didn't answer, only smiled enigmatically, finally found a flashlight, pulled back the floorboards and stared at the cellar lid. You're the master. You're the first to go, Tony said, making an inviting gesture with his hand. If you get eaten in there, don't worry, I'll avenge you. Very funny, Sam said. The lid was locked with a small lock. It had to be broken with some kind of iron. The lid gave way reluctantly, with a long creak, but Mary in the next room didn't wake up. Only suddenly she snored loudly. Look, he pointed his eyes in Tony's direction, snoring like a man, and she's such a fragile fairy. Sam shone his light down and stared suspiciously at the wooden stairs leading down. Then he cautiously began to descend. Finally, his feet touched the floor. What's up? Tony hovered overhead. Hey, why'd you say something? Sam was at a loss for words. The cellar was not a small cellar, but rather a full basement. And actually, Sam expected to see here, well, shelves, racks, where the previous owners kept supplies. Maybe a bunch of junk, but what he saw was. Come down, he called, swallowing hard. You've got to see for yourself. Yes. Tony rustled up the heavy weight and finally found himself downstairs too. The first thing that caught his eye were the bookcases. Yes, it was a strange place to put them, but the fact was that there were 4 bookcases full of books in the basement cellar, and from the looks of it, they were antiques. Also in the basement had been renovated, and not for 3 cents. The floor was concrete. The walls were leveled and painted. Sam pointed to the ventilation system, where everything had been done to the best of his ability. There was also a massive table, littered with books and maps, both old and newer, which were all scribbled with felt-tip pens and pens. In the corner of the basement, there was some equipment, the purpose of which the guys didn't even understand, but assumed that it was digital and complex. It was one of the devices, resembling a metal detector, that made the very sound that had initially attracted Sam's attention. The guy randomly poked at the digital control panel and the sound disappeared. It must have turned on its own. Maybe that's what happens with complicated machinery, he muttered thoughtfully. But the main thing that caught his eye and made him wonder anxiously about the purpose of this place were 2 things. First, the cage. It was about 1.5 meters high, 3 meters long, and 2 meters wide. It was made of thick iron bars covered with rust, and there were 3 locks on its door. One of iron was new to the place, the second was silver in color, and the third shone as if it were made of pure gold. Next to the cage were chains nearly as thick as my hand and several massive steel collars. Sam, why? What's that for? Asked Tony, who wasn't smiling or joking anymore. I don't know. The guy shook his head. He just picked up a hardcover notebook from the table. It didn't look old, and when he opened it, he saw the dates and realized it was a diary. He also recognized his father's handwriting. I'm out of here, Tony said and started climbing up. Yeah, let's go. In the morning. Sam swallowed the end of the sentence. In the morning what? We'll figure it out. We'll figure out what the hell this is? Yeah, it was definitely something to think about. Boys, why are you so glum? Maria asked at breakfast. They were sitting at the table eating pancakes that Tony had made unexpectedly for everyone. In general, he knew how to cook. Martha had taught him, but due to his constant business, but more often even laziness, he didn't do it often. "Yeah, that's right," Tony answered and glanced at his friend. "I guess Sam's parents were maniacs. A basement full of maniacal gadgets." "What?" Maria froze before she could get a bite of her pancake to her mouth. "I don't think they were maniacs," Sam sighed. "Well, in all the years I've lived with them, I never noticed anything like that. And then, no, it's just a cage and chains and old books. Where are the pictures of the victims or whatever else maniacs keep in their basements?" "Will someone please explain to me what's going on?" exclaimed the girl. "We better show you." The guys looked at each other. It was less scary to explore the cellar in the daylight, but still the small company felt uncomfortable and hurried upstairs. "I think this might tell us all about it. Well, at least it will help us understand a little." Maria nodded at the diary she had found. "Go on, read it." This was not how they had planned to spend the day. The sun was shining outside the window. The summer afternoon beckoned with heat, and the river must have been wonderfully nice and fresh. But all three of them felt at the same time that they would not be able to rest until they had sorted everything out. The entries in the diary were not neatly kept. Some dates were missing, and in some places, there were some notes made with colored pencils on top of the dough. But his father's handwriting was small, ornate, easy to read, and Sam began to read aloud. Sometimes he was silent, running through the text fluently to pick out the main thing. Sometimes he returned to what he had already read and ran his finger along the lines as if he were checking what he had already learned with what was revealed next. And gradually the picture of what Sam's parents had been doing lately, and why the contents of the cellar were so strange, began to emerge before the little company. It happened that at some point Sam's father became interested in the works of a French historian named Charles Dubois, who, however, differed from most of his colleagues in that he belonged to those historians who adhered to alternative views on many events and facts. His work inspired Father Sam to look at the history of his native land in a different way, and somehow, turning to ancient history, the period of paganism, he saw parallels in local tales and legends with the mythology of ancient Scotland, and decided that perhaps ancient people knew something. It also turned out that Sam's father's ideas were strongly supported by his wife, and so the two of them turned to the study of a local legend about a certain water monster horse which lived underwater, required sacrifices, and also guarded untold treasures. A historian and cultural historian, these men, educated and talented, spent the last years of their lives trying to find, learn, and understand how this legend could be connected to reality. It was mentioned in the diary that Sam's father also turned to cryptozoologists, that is, zoologists outside of official science, who believed in the existence of mythical creatures unknown to mankind, including, for example, the same kelpies, as well as Bigfoot, Mothman, mermaids, unicorns. Sam's father got antique books, maps. He spent all his savings on it. Reading this, Sam sighed. Now it was clear why his parents had nothing in their bank accounts after their death, although they had said that thanks to their frugality, their son would one day inherit a substantial capital. But that didn't seem important against the background of their sudden and terrible loss. "So, did I understand correctly that your father wanted to find this water horse and the treasure he was guarding? Is that a cage and chains down there for him? Why are there 3 locks, by the way? Is there really one gold one?" In Scotland, they believed it was the only way to keep him on land and tame him. For a few minutes, there was silence in the house. Only Mars, who suddenly liked the idea of biting the doormat, spoke, or rather grumbled quietly. Each of the little company was immersed in his own thoughts. "Perhaps it is better to forget about all this." Maria was the first to break the silence. "You can't bring back the past, and this is all. Well, throw out all the unnecessary things, and give the books to the library." "No," Tony shook his head. "You could sell them on the internet. The collectors would snap them up, maybe even make $1 million. What do you think?" He elbowed Sam in the side. "I think I never really knew my parents," he grinned sadly. "So they'd gone crazy, and I didn't even see any signs." "Why crazy?" Tony objected. "You know, don't be like that. Parents after all." Yes, the picture of the world was different from the usual, accepted, But, at least they treated you well. And mine, they're serious. They don't believe in mysticism. And now what they've come to is a drunken booze hound. Have you tried to cure them? Suddenly asked Maria. Earlier she had not spoken to Tony on this subject. Do you think you can swaddle them like babies and take them to the hospital? Tony snapped at her. I told them that I hate being their son. They don't listen. And you know what? You don't need any advice, okay? I'd already tried everything. And no more drinking. No more losing their humanity. It's their personal choice. That's it, buddy. Don't boil over. Sam soothingly patted him on the shoulder. We got it all figured out, and we won't touch this subject again while we're on country vacation, okay? Finally, everyone wrapped up the basement topic by turning to today. They decided that there was nothing to lose him entirely and went to the river after all. There Tony jokingly tried to drag Maria into the water, and she squealed that he would ruin her new blouse. You're so boring, the boyfriend said, pulling sand out of his head because Maria had tipped it onto the shore. You'll never find a boyfriend like that. Well, tell me, who dresses for a vacation in the country like they do for university or an office job? Also, Miss, I am the smartest and most decent. He joked and dodged an empty seashell thrown at him. I have my swimsuit with me, Maria said, and sundresses and shorts. I can't wait to see, Tony whistled. Just dressed in the morning as usual. Tomorrow I'll surprise you, laughed Maria. In the evening, so as not to bother with cooking, they sent Tony to grandmother Selena, from whom they bought homemade sausage, homemade bread, and eggs for the morning for breakfast and all other edible. They live well. Tony sighed enviously when they returned. Grandma runs everything. It has already become known that Selena's grandmother has a son and a daughter. The son lives in the city and the daughter in the village, in her mother's house with her husband and 3 children. And the whole family unanimously obeys Selena, who, despite her age, does not complain about her health at all and is not going to share a grain of power with any of the household. The next morning, while the boys were preparing breakfast, Tony was baking pancakes again and said that Sam should learn the recipe because he would surely win his future wife's heart through her stomach one day. And the very first few volumes raised new questions. Who is B.S.? she asked. It says here that the books are from the personal library of a certain B.S. But your father's name was Alexander, right? That must have been the previous owner from whom the books were bought, Sam replied. After breakfast, we looked around the house and the yard, and Sam made notes in his notebook about what needed to be done, repaired, or remodeled, so that in the end the property would be sold in decent condition and potential buyers wouldn't have a chance to nag the price. The next few days passed surprisingly measured, calm, and even lazy. After the initial anxieties about the seller find had subsided, the little company discovered that village life was not as easy as it seemed. So, it wasn't easy to get used to the silence. No, naturally, the village was full of its own noises, but it was nothing compared to the noises of the city. And at night you could hear crickets and nightingales. Well, anyway, Tony said it must be nightingales, and he couldn't identify any other songbirds. Let me taste a little, Maria asked timidly one day, when Tony once again brought a jar of warm, steaming milk from Selena's grandmother. Aren't you afraid? The boy grinned, filling the mug. Maria shook her head, wrapped both hands around the mug, and sipped it, squeezing her eyes shut. She stood there for a minute with her eyes squeezed shut, then licked her lips and smiled. Delicious, she said. Sam had to put Mars on a leash because the dog was always trying to run off into the vast countryside. Mars, of course, was not happy about the restriction of his rights and expressed his displeasure by making complaining noises. One day Sam, once again coming to grandmother Selena for provisions, became an accidental witness of her conversation with a neighbor. Who can you trust, Anna? Oh, what is going on? Emotionally indignant Selena. You don't say. The neighbor splashed her hands. John all his life collected these books. I guess the thieves didn't have any heart at all. Sam's ears perked up when he heard the name and surname. Something about them, coupled with the mention of books, seemed vaguely familiar. Thieves? Is there crime here? He asked. Of course there is, Anna sighed. We don't live on Mars after all. It seems to be peaceful here, but things happen. And John Seminich had his books stolen almost a year ago, and it's unclear who stole them. John was our teacher. He taught math and history too, Selenet explained. He's retired now. He's a passionate collector of old books, you know. And now, somebody's got the nerve to hurt an old man. It's just awful, Sam muttered, desperately hoping his cheeks and ears weren't flaming scarlet, because he seemed to know exactly who had stolen John's possessions. He waited until Selena handed him the groceries he needed. Then he paid her and ran towards his house, almost running because of the milk he was afraid to spill. My parents stole the books, Sam blurted out as soon as he stepped into the hall and told his friends. What do we do? Tony asked. We have to return the books, Maria said sternly. That's the obvious thing to do, Sam thought. But how do we do it? Simple, said Tony. Drop them off at night, along with a note in which to write a sincere apology. But we could be found by fingerprints. No one's gonna come looking for us. Why would the old man do that? Maria said. Because the books were stolen, Tony answered. So he said that we return. Maria was confused in the flow of thoughts of the interlocutor. And anyway, Tony said emotionally, I think we better just go to him and personally hand over the books, Sam suggested. And everyone looked at him like he was crazy. What? Let's explain the situation as it is. After all, I'm not personally responsible for my parents' actions, and you guys aren't even involved. You're just my friends. Okay, perhaps this is really the most reasonable way out, agreed after some reflection Maria. I'm in, Tony winked. But if anything, keep in mind that I have a passport and I can run to Mexico. Why Mexico? Maria frowned. Because they don't seem to extradite criminals from there, Tony replied with the most serious look. What makes you think that? The girl raised an eyebrow. I heard in some action movies. You watch too much nonsense, snorted Maria. I don't even read fiction. Why should I read other people's fiction when I can read something on self-development? Shall we go out tonight? Sam cut in. It seems to me that the sooner we get this thing over with, the better. And everyone agreed. Sam went to Grandma Paula's house again, and on the pretext that he wanted to learn something important from the antiquities collector, because his parents, as it turned out, also valued rare books, asked for John's address. It turned out that he lived not in this, but in a neighboring village, which also had a very remarkable name. Where are the other badgers? The side ones, for example. Tony asked curiously, but no one gave him an answer. They went as a group, including Mars. The thing was that the dog, as it turned out, hated not only to sit on a tether, but also to stay alone when they left for the last time, went swimming on the river. Then on their return, they got an angry lecture from the neighbors that their animal was howling so much that they felt sorry for him. And it also disturbed the daytime sleep of old people and children. Good afternoon, said Sam cheerfully, as the gate opened and the face of an old man with a neat white Spanish beard and penetrating blue eyes under bushy eyebrows emerged from behind it. We should see John Semyonovich, they corrected him. On what, may I ask, matter? Do you want tutoring before you go to university? No, I'm already in my final year, smiled Sam. She is too, he nodded at Maria. And he's going to live with a specialized secondary school, he finished about Tony. But that doesn't mean I'm worse or stupider. Whether jokingly or genuinely, the latter stood up for his human value. You see, I'm a Walker son. I heard about the accident, John nodded. I'm sorry for your loss. You see, it's hard to explain, but Sam drew in more air, gathering his courage. I've come to return your books. They were stolen from your library. John stiffened, frozen, as if not believing the reality of the young man's words. Then his gaze changed from questioning to astonished and finally warmed. Come in, of course. John unlocked the gate and the little company entered the courtyard. Don't be alarmed, John said, when a dog's face, nearly as big as a bear's head, emerged from the kennel, followed by an equally impressive dog's body. It's Fifi and she's completely harmless. It's just that she seems to be interested in your... What's the name of the marvelous creature? John asked, leaning over to Mars and stroking him boldly on the head. When he said the spaniel's name, Sam watched with interest as Mars squealed and tore off the leash, clearly eager to meet Fifi, who wagged her tail. Don't let him down. John wagged his finger at the guests. She's going through a period, if you'll pardon the physiological details. where she's in the process of becoming a mother. Are you planning on having a puppy? Maybe someone you know would like one? No, Sam said, and for some reason he blushed. I don't want to be the owner of a Mary Pack either, John smiled. So let's all come inside, not excluding the kindly Mars. I live alone, as you can see, John said as they entered the house. Inside it was simple, but very clean and even cozy. There were potted flowers on the windows. There was a real samovar on the table. I was just about to have tea, John said. So, young people, please come to the table. And we're not empty-handed. Tony stepped forward. Here, let's have tea with this, he said, handing John a box of chocolates. He had chosen the most expensive and ornate of all those sold in the village store. At first, they just drank a cup of tea, sampled the sweets, and talked on general topics about village everyday life. Then, without haste and with evident pleasure, John examined all the books returned to him. He stroked their spines and pages, shook his head, and chuckled softly. Thank you very much. You're a nice young man. I'm really very uncomfortable about that. Not another word, John exclaimed. Rather, it was my own fault. You see, your father came to see me once. He was looking for help in a delicate matter, and I suppose you already know what this is about, since you've heard about the missing books. Yes, Sam nodded. My parents searched. They believed in all those myths. I didn't believe his offer to find the Kelpies. John smiled sadly. And I have to say, I'm still ashamed of my callousness. I should have realized how important it was for him to have access to those books as a historian. I literally quarreled with your father, and for that I truly, sincerely apologize. I called him a gullible fool and told him that his scheme was a disgrace to the profession of history. Yes, how wrong I was. You say so. You say you were wrong. But why? Asked Maria. Do you believe in Kelpies now? No, sweet girl, John smiled. But what should I have loaned the books? Your father was a good man, Sam. He would have returned them. As it was, I pushed him into the crime myself. You see, I didn't want to share the books because, you see, it hurt my professional pride. And he was forced to do it when I went to town. I had a son living there. I was visiting. You asked me if I believed in Kelpies. John poured everyone another cup of tea from the samovar. Unfortunately, no. Belief in such miracles could make everyday life a little brighter. But I believe that almost every legend has some truth, in the sense that almost always tales and legends, as well as many fairy tales, are rooted in something real, even if they appear to people in a highly modified, distorted form. He and John talked a little more about everything, and then they all went back. A few more days flew by in the village rest. Hey, youngsters. Grandpa Billy was standing outside the fence and waving his hand, attracting the attention of those who came into the yard. The old man looked worried. Have you seen our tractor driver? No, he hasn't, Tony said. What happened? He asked. He's missing. Missing how? Maria asked. The girl was holding a broom in her hands, with which she was manfully, though from the last nerve, collecting cobwebs from under the windows of the house. How should I know? Billy waved his hands. He had to go to work today, you know, and he left yesterday on his tractor for the woods, so he disappeared. He went on his way. And there, well, he must have turned somewhere. How? Tony was surprised. If a tractor goes anywhere in the forest, won't it be noticeable? It'd leave a trail like an elephant's. Harvey can drive through a rye field without a spike. He's a good boy, Grandpa Billy said with a thumbs up. How do I know how it happened? Maybe the woodsman taught him how to cover his tracks and confuse them. Don't listen to him, said a woman in her 40s who came to the fence. We think that Harvey left his tractor somewhere near the forest, but we haven't gone around it all yet. He just said that he had something important to do in the forest, so there's probably nowhere else for him to be. If we can't find him by tonight, we'll call a rescue team. So the rescuers, since he disappeared yesterday, it's time to call them, said Maria. There's no telling what could have happened to him in the forest. Guys, she turned to her neighbors in the village rest. Shall we help? Well, we could, Sam nodded, but he didn't think it was a good idea. First of all, because he was seriously afraid that they might get lost, and then 4 people would have to be rescued from the thicket of the forest. Unless, of course, this city girl Maria, who was used to whining on any occasion, would attract wolves who would eat her. And secondly, Though he realized that it was extremely cynical, Sam did not understand why they should look for the missing tractor driver, who was essentially a stranger to them. Especially since there was someone else to do it, the villagers were gathering, and the rescue team would soon be involved. But still, Sam supported Maria and Tony in agreement. "Let's give Mars some of this man's stuff to sniff and he'll find it," Tony suggested. "Mars doesn't look like a former search dog," Sam objected. "He's more like a former couch potato. Without special training, dogs can't do that." "Too bad," Tony said disappointedly. "Then I'll just pack my backpack quickly and we'll be on our way." They were out in half an hour. Grandpa Billy said that the villagers had decided to enter the forest from the outskirts, and so the small company, thinking that there were enough people in that direction without them, decided to move into the forest from the riverside. The sun was high in the sky, and the friends figured that they could easily do, so to speak, their duty to search for their missing neighbor in a couple of hours, and then return home. They would have lunch and go about their business. "Beautiful," Tony exclaimed once again. "Oh, I'm smart to be dressed like this." It was hard not to agree with him. He had wrapped himself in light, but covering the maximum of his body, and even his cap had a special net to protect his head and neck from stinging insects. Sam dressed lighter and was now suffering from bites, and Maria had gone in shorts and was now complaining about the injustice of the universe. She could have gone back, stayed at home. "No," stubbornly declared the girl, and once again with a quiet groan slapped herself on the leg, knocking down a mosquito. "I have a cream refreshing for the skin. I'll put it on later." "It won't help," Tony said in a lecturing tone. "I told you to take mine. It's insect repellent. It stinks. Who's gonna smell you in the woods?" After another half an hour, when her feet itched unbearably, Maria agreed to use the special remedy. The friends walked through the forest, loudly shouting out the missing tractor driver to them. At first, it seemed to them that they heard the voices of other seekers, but then they decided that they took for them their own echo. The friends hoped not to get too far from the edge of the forest. "Who knows the 10 signs that you are lost?" Tony asked after a while. "I don't." "What are they?" Sam asked, stopping and leaning against a tree. He pulled a bottle of water out of his backpack and took a greedy gulp. "They must exist, but even without them it's clear we're lost," said Tony. "Yeah, sorry, that wasn't funny." "Yes, not at all," frowned Maria and looked around anxiously. "We couldn't have gotten lost." "Why not?" Sam asked. "Because we always stayed near the edge of the forest, and even the field was visible through the trees," she answered without much confidence. "It's all forest now," Tony sighed. "And this is the 4th time we come back to this stump with mushrooms. So, there are exactly 2 facts. We're lost. We're going in circles." For a few minutes, everyone was silent. "Stop." Sam grabbed Maria by the arm. "Where are you going?" he asked the girl, who was breathing strangely, very hard and often, and her eyes were darting from side to side. "Let me go. I can't stay here. I can't." "She's panicking," Tony said knowingly. "You'd have to slap her or pinch her harder and she'd come to her senses." Ignoring such harsh advice, Sam just gently shook Maria by the shoulders and ordered her to look him in the eye. "We're going to get out of here. Calm down. It's not winter, and that means we won't freeze. We have food and water with us. Half a bottle of water per nose, tops, and we got Mars to drink," Tony grumbled, but Sam gave him a scary look and went on calmly. "There's a bunch more villagers walking through this forest. Soon the rescuers will be here too. So everything's gonna be all right. Do you understand me? Can you hear me?" "Yes," answered Maria, who was finally able to calm down a little. Meanwhile, the sun was beginning to sink behind the treetops. Tony, praising himself for his foresight, fed Mars a couple of handfuls of the dry dog food he had brought and poured the rest of his water into a bowl. Then he suggested we take a break. "We can look on the bright side," Sam said with an uncertain smile, trying to cheer the girl up. "We're in for a real adventure. I don't think that's ever happened to you before, has it?" "Luckily, I used to have a normal life." Maria sniffled and sat down on the trunk of a fallen tree. "We're sleeping on the bare ground." "It's full of conifers," Sam explained. "You could make a nice bed if you break some brushwood. Summer nights are warm, and we'll build a fire." Tony said enthusiastically, "We'll tell scary stories." "Oh, will you shut up, please?" Maria shouted, and then burst into tears. Sam shook his head reproachfully and asked Tony to be more tactful. He shook his hands, but was quickly distracted by the urgent matters of making a fire and bringing the mentioned lapnik. Soon it was dark, and everyone moved closer to the fire, the warm amber light of which was soothing and made them feel safe. "Are there no wolves around here?" Maria asked. "No, they've been wiped out for over 70 years, Sam said. "I'm sorry. I should have insisted that we didn't go anywhere. It's not a vacation in the countryside. It's a mess." "It's all right. We'll get through it," Tony smiled. Soon everyone, and even Mars, who had been awake for 24 hours a day, began to fall asleep. But as soon as they lay down on the burlap, as soon as they closed their eyes and relaxed, all three of them realized that strange sounds were coming from deep in the forest. Mars also woke up and raised his ears warily. "What is it?" Maria asked, and then suddenly she was near Tony as if his closer presence could protect her. "It sounded like banging on a rock," Sam suggested cautiously. He twisted his head around, but he couldn't figure out exactly where the sound was coming from. "Maybe the moose is grinding its horns," Tony said. "What?" he added in response to his friend's stares. "Well, or a lynx clawing. We'll have to take a look." Sam rose resolutely from his seat and picked up his lantern, picking up his backpack from the ground, because it contained everything he had taken on this unexpectedly long hike, and he didn't know which of it might be useful in the end. "I'm not going anywhere," Maria squeaked, looking anxiously at the fire. "If only we take a torch with us." "I don't know how to make a torch," Sam said. "We have flashlights, the three of us. It's just a forest with no wolves in it. We should check out what's out there. What if someone's in trouble and is trying to attract attention? Or we're being lured into the woods by a woodsman to kill us in a swamp," Tony added. But seeing how the faces of his friends changed, Sam's became reproachful and Maria's turned white, and he apologized hastily. Moving through the forest at night, when all the illumination was a weak, not at all tourist lantern, and the rays of the moon through the dense branches, was not an easy task. But we didn't break our legs, we didn't fall down in the hawthorn bushes, and only once Tony flew into the nettle thicket with curses. And then, all of a sudden, everyone suddenly came to the clearing. It seemed that some fairy tale giant had just cut out a part of the forest with a sickle, leaving an immaculately round area, on which there was a mountain of stones green, but not because it was some rare rock, but because they were all covered with moss. "Careful," Tony warned me. "Can you feel the squelching underfoot? It means that we came to the swamp from this side of the forest. Well, here it is slowly, apparently, begins, and somewhere farther away is already a real swamp. Let's move here. You see, this part of the clearing is dry. That's why the rocks are standing and not underground." The sound stopped, Sam said, waving his flashlight from side to side. "Hey, anybody alive? Can you imagine if you get a negative answer?" Tony joked darkly. "That's a weird question." "Oh, shut up," Maria almost cried. "In my life, no more in the nature. I hate the forest, these thorns, insects, twigs. I want to go to the city." "Quiet," Sam shouted at his friends. "Do you hear that?" They listened and indeed caught some sound, as if an insolent mouse was rustling somewhere nearby. "People, are there people here?" The whole trio jumped when they heard a human voice. It sounded strangely raspy, as if coming from under the ground. "Where are you?" Sam asked, moving forward cautiously, shining his flashlight under his feet. "Downstairs," the voice reported sadly. "I think I broke my leg." "Who are you?" Sam asked. "I'm Harvey," the voice replied. "And you're city folk, aren't you?" They're us." Tony yelled and rushed forward too. In his panic, he accidentally grabbed the flashlight he had taken from Maria. The technique was blinking, and the guy was trying to fix it somehow. The girl, who was left without light, squeaked and ran after him. "So, I think I found it," Sam said, stopping at the place where the rocks began. It looked familiar, and after a moment, Sam realized that it was like Stonehenge, except that the stones were smaller and spaced more often, so that there was almost no space between them. Sam moved very carefully, but his foot almost slipped into the black hole, where there were stones on the ground too, but one flat one had been pushed to the side. Nearby was a huge metal bar, almost as thick as his hand, The flashlight beam slid down and caught a familiar face, reflecting a jumbled palette of emotions. It was indeed Harvey. It turned out that he had climbed down on a rope, but he had not tied it securely enough around one of the rocks, so it had torn under his weight and Harvey had fallen down. With an injured leg and no way to get out, the rope, along with his rucksack, was found nearby. But why did you come here in the first place? Maria wondered. The whole village is looking for you. Do you know? It's a long story, replied the tractor driver. I think we have enough time to listen to it, said Sam, figuring out how to get the caveman's grief out of the backpack. Harvey had another rope in his backpack, apparently a spare, but it seemed very thin, unreliable. But thinking, Sam decided that if he twisted it in half, it might hold. And while he was doing that, Harvey spoke. He said he was just looking for something here. What were you looking for? Asked Maria, who could have sworn Harvey wasn't telling the truth. Guys, looks like he was looking for the same thing your parents were looking for. Tony spoke up. I know. He waved his hand as two pairs of eyes turned to him. It's not nice to poke around in other people's stuff, but he held up a hand that held a book similar to the ones in Sam's parents' basement, with an ancient map tucked between the pages of the book. Harvey had this in his backpack, Tony said. Did you go a little crazy looking for the water horse too? Tony turned to Harvey. No, he answered with a sigh. I was looking for gold. I've got a loan in the bank. My wife is nagging me. And I didn't steal those books, by the way. I borrowed them. That is, if you followed the letter of the law. Then you took without asking and in fact, still stole, summarized Maria said. I'm sorry. Harvey stretched out pitifully. When all this happened to your parents, I came to the wake and here, I took it. Yeah, I know what a jerk I was, but you're not gonna leave me here for this, are you? Get me out of here, please save me. Of course we're not gonna leave you, Sam said, and threw down the rope. Hold on tight. Now we'll lift a little, pull all three of us, and then grab my hand, do you understand? Harvey understood, and soon by joint efforts, all four of them panting from the load, but he was pulled out. The tractor driver stretched out on the ground and tried to breathe for a couple of minutes. Then he got to his feet and immediately groaned, but it was painful to step on his foot. So, you were looking for gold. What makes you think you were here? Tony asked. Sighing, Tony looked around at his friends and finally spoke. It turned out that Sam's father hadn't just asked him for help. He wanted to move these rocks in the woods, but he'd also shared the contents of the legends. Harvey didn't believe in the water horse though, but he decided that this tale could be really connected with the buried gold, and the water horse was invented by the people to scare away the hunters for riches. And so Harvey decided that we can't wait any longer. We must take the gold ourselves, before the townspeople, too, have studied the books and went to look for it. Is there anything down there? Sam asked. No, Harvey shook his head. Just some old hardware. Tony went over to the rocks, lay down on his belly and shined his flashlight inside. The hole, or rather pit, hidden for years under the rock was small and perfectly visible. Earthen floor and walls with tree roots growing through them. Some old iron on the floor and clay shards. Maybe, Tony suggested, there was some kind of burial ground or temple of old. I don't know. We'll figure it out later, Sam said. We got to get out of here. On our own, he added grimly, because cell phones don't work in this thicket. Which way do we go? Tony asked. That way, Sam said confidently. That's where we came from. It's almost light. In fact, I think we'll be out of the forest soon. But in practice, it turned out that in the forest, it seems, only went further. Where are the rescuers? Maria whined grumpily. I'm tired. Only one Mars, it seems, felt great and trotted briskly beside her. And then, the dog became wary and pulled everyone to the side. Sam looked where the animal was leading and almost shouted with joy as he saw a gap between the trees ahead, which could mean only one thing, that they were finally out of the forest. And indeed, soon the forest thinned out and the small company found themselves in a meadow, which stretched as far as the eye could see. There were still some trees, but in general it looked like a grove, not a forest. But the main thing that caught their attention was the lake, shining with ghostly sparks in the light of the moon and the sky, which had barely begun to lighten. Are there any lakes near the village? Tony asked. There are, Harvey answered. They called them witch lakes, so the fish bite well here? Why are they called witch lakes? Tony asked. So they say. The tractor driver lowered his voice. They are cursed. They can only come here at daylight. What nonsense, exclaimed Maria, to whom, as soon as they came out of the forest, returned her usual skepticism and intolerance if someone was superstitious. You will say that it is. That thing lives here. What's his name? Maria took a few steps ahead of the men and stood in front of him, her hands at her sides. All right then, listen to me carefully. As soon as we leave here, I'm going home. I'd had enough adventures, okay? The wind blew, the reeds rustled, a bird cried out, long and hard. Kelpie, said Tony. The water horse is called the Kelpie, and he's right behind you right now. Maria opened her mouth to respond with a barb and a whip to the insufferable fellow who had caused her such a storm of conflicting feelings lately, but she didn't make a sound, because right now a sound was coming from behind her back. It was a heavy, thick, voluminous horse snort. Maria turned very slowly toward the lake. There, on its opposite side, a black head emerged from the bushes. A thick, wet mane covered her, and the horse's neck, twigs, and something green were tangled in the mane. He had less worries, but at the same time it was unpleasantly prickled on his heart. After all, it turned out that the farewell to the house of parents, grandparents, distant ancestors, it became closer and closer, took on more real and harsh features. But the guy answered in agreement. I myself am still not a gardener and go far away, if just for a weekend vacation. He explained his decision to his friends, so I sell unequivocally. And what to do with all this? Asked Maria. You cannot in a set and hand the basement. Of course not, Sam agreed. A couple of days later, he visited Harvey's house, who announced that his leg was almost completely fine, just a little sprain. Harvey agreed to help him clear the basement and soon showed up with all the necessary tools. The same cage had to be sawed down to take it to the dump. The silver and gold locks, Sam decided to keep as a memory of his parents. He decided to keep his father's diary and some books from their personal library. The rest of the volumes were photographed and put on the internet for sale, but they decided to donate a few more books to the local e-village library. And what is this? Tony asked, seeing Sam wrapping some particularly ancient books in gift paper and tying them with a beautiful ribbon, both of which he had bought the day before at the local store. I think we should do some justice and pay one person a visit after all, Sam smiled. By the way, have you seen Mars? Called him to eat and he's not coming. Looks like he's running around somewhere, Tony said. He can't stay tied up all the time, can he? Soon we went to John's place in the next village. Again, not empty-handed. This time taking the cake, which, by the way, in order not to spoil while walking through the hot weather, placed in the bag refrigerator. John, fortunately, happened to be home. He was surprised by the guests, but surprised pleasantly and immediately went to put on the samovar for tea. Mars? Marveled Sam when suddenly Fifi's face appeared from the kennel, followed by the spaniel. I was just about to take him to you, John said. He rushed straight to my girl. Apparently, they are in love. But if there will be offspring, it's arrangement in good hands. You do not worry, I will take completely on myself. Finally, we sat down at the table. John praised the cake. He was emotional when he opened the gift. You know, after your father came to me, I mentally returned to that conversation more than once, he said thoughtfully. And after your parents' accident. Anyway, I've decided to do some serious research on the subject. Just a moment, with a warning thumbs up. The old man got up from the table and went into the next room, where he rustled something for a long time. Here, he said, when he returned and gently set down on the table a book from his own collection. It looked as if it might crumble at the slightest touch, but the pages inside were remarkably well preserved. See? John asked. Tony, Sam, and Maria leaned over to the page. They didn't understand a thing. It looks like some kind of puzzle, Tony suggested. You're smart. John glared at him from behind his glasses. Wouldn't you like to study history? No, thanks, Tony smiled. There are only two things I like about history: adventure books and movies. So look at this again, it's really interesting. John turned to his guests and finally explained himself. He also opened one of the books Sam had given him and said that the information in it seemed to confirm the truth of some facts in the book that had belonged to John himself. and that he had doubted the accuracy of the information in it until now. It turned out that the page really depicted a puzzle, and the book itself was written in the middle of the 19th century. And it talked about those local legends with kelpies and gold. However, this scientific work was not widely disseminated for the reason that its author rejected the version that somewhere in these parts can be buried untold treasures. He believed that we are talking about some ancient pagan monument dedicated to some pagan deity. He believed that to find in the end can be found antiquities, priceless objects that belong in museums, but not banal piles of gold coins. It is believed that it could be an underground temple, and that it could have hiding places, which were, literally nearby, perhaps right in our very forest. And theoretically, having analyzed this puzzle, I have already established the approximate coordinates of the cache, and in that book that you gave me, this is such a wonderful coincidence was found confirmation of it. Actually, Sam said, looking at Tony and Maria, we think we know what you're talking about. I think we found one. Tony added emotionally, swinging his hand so hard that he almost knocked over a cup. What? Are you serious? John looked at them incredulously. The small group had to tell the whole truth about their nighttime adventure. John listened attentively, nodding and stroking his beard, and at the part where they met the kelpies, he laughed heartily. Well, young men, he shook his head. I think I need to see it all with my own eyes. And now? No, Maria protested. We'll get lost again. Not at all, John smiled. I know these woods inside and out. I grew up here, and I know the place you told me about too. We used to play there as kids, but who would have thought that under one of these stones there could be such a secret? It turns out my assumptions were absolutely correct. Come on, let's find out tonight. Let's not take Mars with us anymore, Tony said. Or what if this time he gets off the leash and gets lost in the woods? We could leave your dog here, John suggested. He and Fifa get along well. Trusting John that they would not get lost and that they would be back before the sun went down, they set off. This time Maria had thoughtfully and generously poured insect spray on herself. The glade with the stones seemed less mystical in the daylight, and the stones themselves seemed smaller. Be careful, please, Sam asked, noticing the vigor with which John intended to go down. Oh, young man, I spent all my free time camping when I was your age, and you don't forget that kind of experience, John replied cheerfully. And then, to the amazement of those present, he skillfully fixed the rope on the trunk of the tree closest to the stone circle, threw it down, then sent the bag with some tools and finally climbed down himself. For some time there was only a rustling sound from below. It's incredible, John shouted. You just have to see it. I'm not going up there, Maria said firmly. And besides, if the three of you get stuck down there, someone will have to go and get help. Sam and Tony called her a coward, waved goodbye, and went down with enthusiasm, anticipating that John had discovered something extraordinary. And they were not mistaken. John had removed some of the earth from one of the walls of the pit, and behind it, there was something like a door. It had been built, of course, a long time ago. It was made of a bizarre interweaving of wood and metal parts, and naturally, over time, the former had decayed, and the latter had practically fallen apart at the slightest touch. So the door, when John pushed it forward, didn't just open, but rather collapsed. Behind the door was a low corridor that seemed to turn sideways after 20 steps. Aren't we going to get trapped in here? Sam asked apprehensively. It shouldn't, John replied. You see the rocks in the ground here? It looks like they used them to reinforce the corridor. They built it to last. Come on. The light of the flashlight was lost somewhere far ahead. They passed one corner, another. Sam estimated that, judging by the length of the corridor, this strange underground building went far beyond the clearing. The roots of trees that pierced the ceiling in some places also spoke about it. It smelled of dampness, of earth, and the further they went, the more uncomfortable Sam felt, the more he was still thinking that there might be a cave-in. Suddenly, a new turn ended in a wide passage into what could be called an entire underground hall, at least 5 meters wide and about the same length. The ceiling here was supported by roughly hewn stone columns. Sam and Tony sighed in delight when they saw that there were piles of pottery, both unpainted and colored. They were piled up, some whole, some damaged. There were also some ancient metal objects, and a few silver coins glittered among them. In the center of the room stood a stone statue. One could immediately realize that it was not made of ordinary stone, but of something that the guys, according to their not-so-complete knowledge, defined as black marble. This statue represented a horse standing up on its hind legs, and how marvelously it was done. Even in the meager light of the flashlights, one could distinguish the waves of mane and tail, the emotional expression of the muzzle, and the most amazing thing about this sculpture was that in addition to the hind legs, the horse had a mermaid's tail, and on the sides and chest, one could see skillful carvings that imitated scales. John explained in a confused and enthusiastic manner that this was direct evidence that similar myths and legends could be found in different parts of the world, and it turned out that in these parts, long ago, they believed in the same kind of water horses that were mentioned in the tales of Scotland. "Well, young men," John said with a sigh, "congratulations, we are now the discoverers of something incredible." "Well, what is it? Did you find a mountain of shards?" Maria asked skeptically and even with a bit of snidiness when they went upstairs. "You won't believe it when you see it," Tony said, handing Maria a smartphone with a picture of the underground finds. John insisted that on their return to the village, his companions should not say a word to anyone about anything. He was seriously afraid that a crowd of curious people, or even those who wanted to eat antiquities, might prevent the normal exploration of the place and the preservation of all the finds. And only later, when the real historians and archaeologists arrived, everything and everyone became known. "Well, why didn't you say anything?" Harvey was indignantly offended. "You could have told me. It's thanks to me, in fact, all this good was found." "Well, there's a book about it," Sam said. "So I'm not involved at all?" The tractor driver squinted. "Oh, city folk. Don't feel bad, man." Tony patted him on the shoulder. "John says he's going to write a book about all these finds and dedicate a couple pages to your adventures." "Wow, that's great." Harvey cheered up in a flash. Tony added with a chuckle, "As an example of what you can get into if you chase the gold of legends," and the tractor driver went quiet again. "All right, let him write the truth as it is." After a little thought, he waved his hand. "I just remembered, while I was walking to the clearing, I met wolves, a whole pack of them. I had to fight with them. We should have John write about that too." Sam, Tony, and Maria looked at each other, and for some reason it seemed to them that Harvey had made up the wolf story right away and had decided to lie so that John could portray him in the book as a brave man. Summer, meanwhile, was coming to an end. The village vacation, with all its adventures, had flown by like a day. It was time to return to the city. Sam, though he was sorry to do it, sold the house. And from the bottom of his heart, he wished the buyer, who was the father of a large family, a happy life in it. And Sam noticed a change in the behavior of the friends between Tony and Maria. Though they might seem like complete opposites, but there was definitely some kind of relationship. They quarreled less and less with each other, and even sometimes talked sweetly about something. But if he caught them doing it, they broke off immediately, as if the attention to their own personalities, discovered together, embarrassed them. And suddenly it was decided to leave Mars in the village, and Sam decided that if the spaniel was in love with Fifi, there was no point in interfering, especially since John didn't mind having 2 dogs living with him. He said he would take good care of them, feed them well, and take them to the vet once in a while for preventive care. It was a wonderful summer, Tony said as we drove back. "But I won't go to the country again," Maria sighed. "I won't go next year either," Tony smiled. "But I want to go to Mexico to study abandoned cities. Are you coming with me?" "No way in hell," snorted Maria. "Do you know how dangerous it is in Mexico?" Sam was driving. He smiled. For some reason, he thought the two of them would make a great couple. As for his own personal life, he thought that one day he too would meet a wonderful girl with whom he would be happy.